Andy here with the Deplorable General, and I'm coming to you today because I watched a video yesterday on the Second Amendment, okay? The video was from a YouTube channel that calls itself The Origins of Everything, and in this video, the narrator tries to explain that the individual right to own guns was not a consideration in the Second Amendment until at some point in the 1900s, basically. She ties back that idea to racism, she ties it to socialism, she ties it to all kinds of things that we as Americans believe are inherently evil and not good. And basically she goes back and she cites like 5 different Supreme Court decisions. So I wanted to jump into the Second Amendment a little bit, and really there's been other people that have made videos like this, so this is not entirely unique, but I think that this needs to be said, this needs to be put out there, and people need to have an understanding of what the Second Amendment is, what it says, what it was intended for. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go ahead and put the Second Amendment up here for you to read, and I'm going to read it for you now. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay? Now, what you need to notice is the punctuation in this statement. Okay? You notice that there are commas after militia and after security of a free state. You'll see those commas here. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, the Second Amendment says that militias are necessary to the security of a free state. So, because militias are necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The punctuation in this statement is very important, okay, because it's making several statements. The comma can be used in several different ways, okay? It can be used as a pause or a breath in a sentence, or it can be used to separate 2 separate ideas in the same sentence that are related. Now that is what's happening here. This is not just a breath that the Founding Fathers said, this sentence is way too long. We need people to be able to take breaths in between each part. That doesn't make any sense. Part of the Constitution was drafted very carefully and thoughtfully. So the punctuation in this sentence was designed to draw attention to separate issues that are related into the same sentence. Okay, so what it's saying again is that a militia is essential to the freedom and security of a state, and that because of that, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. What does that mean? Well, we have some quotes here. Actually, let's go back to this. So, why is that important? Okay. So, Thomas Jefferson made the statement, on every occasion of constitutional interpretation, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adapted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying to force what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, instead, let us conform to the probable one in which it was passed. This is very, very important, because what Thomas Jefferson said is if there's ever any question as to what the Constitution means, all you have to do is go back to the original arguments, the original discussions that are well documented, well recorded, when the Constitution was created, and you'll be able to see what was meant by that part of the Constitution. Okay, so in particular here we're looking at the Second Amendment. So we have some things to consider here. First of all is in regards to the militia. So Richard Henry Lee, he was basically the founding father of Virginia. He says, a militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves, and include, according to the past and general usage of the states, all men capable of bearing arms. To preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of people always possess arms, and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. He also said, a militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves, and include all men capable of bearing arms. Okay, Richard Henry Lee was not the only founding father to make this statement. James Madison's made similar statements. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin have all made similar statements as to who the militia are. The militia are all people capable of bearing arms. But if we go back to Jefferson's quote about recollecting the spirit manifested in the debates, then we can see that the founding fathers thought that the militia was the people themselves, the people, all of us, which is why in the Second Amendment they said the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that we've cleared that up, okay? Now, as far then as the Second Amendment being an individual right to keep and bear arms, which again, this video that I watched claimed that that was not the case to begin with, that it was only about militias until the 1900s when it became an individual issue. And the argument is that militias basically became a thing of the past, so to speak, even though we're going to do another issue on the history of the militia and where the militia stands currently, and that's to come. The argument was that then the militia became irrelevant in the 1900s because we have standing armies, and we're going to get to that here in a minute. But therefore now we're going to use the Second Amendment to defend the individual's right to keep and bear arms. That's the premise of this video that was made. So let's look at what the founding fathers said about the individual's right to keep and bear arms. George Washington, okay, said, a free people ought not only be armed but disciplined, to which end a uniform and well-digested plan are requisite. And their safety and interest require that they should promote such manufactories as tend to render them independent of others for essential, particularly military supplies. Okay, so what he's saying is that everybody should be armed, and we shouldn't rely on government for supplies. But in this case, he's referring particularly to military supplies, being guns. Okay, so when the argument is made, particularly by the left, that we shouldn't own military-grade weapons or military-style weapons, which a lot of people will claim the AR-15 is, that only the military needs those kinds of weapons. Well, George Washington, okay, our first president, says in direct response to that no, people need to be armed and have the same level of armament and supplies as the military. George Washington says that. Alexander Hamilton says the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States, who are peaceable citizens, from keeping their own arms. James Madison says the Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. So he's saying that that's a right that's exclusively American. Thomas Jefferson said, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. He also said, the Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed. George Mason said, to disarm the people is the most effectual way to enslave them. And let's see, he also said, to go back to the militia, George Mason said, I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. Let's see here. In the Blackstone's Commentaries on Laws of England in 1803, St. George Tucker says, "This may be considered as the true palladium of liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest limits possible. Wherever standing armies are kept up, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction." Powerful. And Joseph Stories wrote in the Commentaries on the Constitution of the United States in 1833, "The right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of liberties of a republic, since it offers a strong moral check against the usurpation and arbitrary powers of rulers, and will generally, even if are successful in the first instance, enable the people to resist and triumph over them." It was quite clear that the Founding Fathers intended the Second Amendment to cover the rights of individuals to keep and bear arms. Anybody who would argue different is either lying to you or they're willfully ignorant. It's quite clear what the founders intended, and you can just read those quotes back and you can see that. Now, why? Why was it so important? Okay, so the Dick Act was passed in 1902 and into 1903, and basically it defined the militia. Okay, it farther defined. There have been other acts prior to, but it farther defined the militia. Basically, it established the National Guard. It broke the militia into three separate classes. One is the organized militia, which they called the National Guard. The other one is the naval militia. And then the third is the unorganized militia. And then it basically laid out the standard, which were then improved later on, not many years later, in the 19-teens, for like training standards and such. But in 1902, 1903, when the Dick Act passed, it basically defined the organized militia being the National Guard, the naval militia, and the unorganized militia. Okay, that's where it broke those down to. Now, the relevance of that. Basically, the Founding Fathers did not trust standing armies. Why didn't they trust standing armies? Well, because England had a standing army, and they saw the tyranny that allowed England to impose upon the people. It was basically at the barrel of a gun. The people had to do whatever the king said, and if they didn't, then they had to face the military. We have a couple of quotes. Again, these are some more quotes from some of our founders. George Washington said, "The army is a dangerous instrument to play with." The army is a dangerous instrument to play with. James Madison said, "A standing army is one of the greatest mischiefs that can possibly happen." Alexander Hamilton said, "Standing armies are dangerous to liberty." Thomas Jefferson said, "None but an armed nation can dispense with a standing army." Then James Monroe said, "Our Union is not held together by standing armies or by any ties other than the positive interests and powerful attractions of its parts towards each other." So obviously, our Founding Fathers had a distrust of standing armies, right? I mean, like, it's quite obvious in their statements that they did not trust standing armies. So the militia was their answer to standing armies, okay? Now, we've seen the government obviously create standing armies. We've seen the government define the militia as the National Guard in the early 1900s. And now we are seeing like the Second Amendment devolve even farther, in the original intent devolve even farther by this argument that the Second Amendment is not there to protect the individual rights of people to own firearms. So we see, if we, again, let's take a look at the Second Amendment here. We're going to pop it up. Okay, and a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Meaning, quite simply, that because the Founding Fathers had a mistrust of standing armies, that the people had the ultimate power and authority. We, the people, us, me, you, the people, had the ultimate right to protect our states and our security and our freedom. So because of that, our right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's quite simple, folks. I'm sorry I had to break it down in a 20-minute video here for you, but this is something that has been argued over and over and over again for the past several hundred years, and it's quite clear when looked at in a literal sense, with the respect to proper punctuation, diction, grammar. You know, it should be easy for anybody to see with those things, as well as the original arguments of our Founding Fathers, that the Second Amendment does in fact protect your right to keep and bear arms. I hope you learned something from this. Tune in to us on Thursday nights where we do tactical tips and tricks, guns and gear review, and some political commentary. A lot of political commentary lately on the Deplorable General Thursday nights. Check us out there. Check us out on our Facebook page, Tactful Tactical, our YouTube page, Don't Tread Space on My Liberty. If you can't find it that way, just go ahead and search for the Deplorable General, and you should be able to see some of the videos that we've posted. Click on that and you can like, share, and subscribe from there. We really encourage that you like, share, subscribe. The algorithms on both Facebook and YouTube are designed as to not allow people like us to organically grow. We have to force it by sharing it with the masses. So we just ask that you help us with that. We have some good reviews. We have a episode coming up here. Evan and I are going to be doing an episode where we're comparing options for body armor. It's a good episode. We have some contributions from some really good body armor companies, so we're going to be able to bring those to you, kind of do a mini review on all of those different options, and kind of help you to see what option might be best for you in your situation. So tune in to us later on for that. Hopefully we bring you more content, but just wanted to break down the Second Amendment for everybody so that way you know exactly what it is and you have a logical and consistent argument to use when discussing the Second Amendment with people who might not be as educated as you now are about it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Andy, Deplorable General, over and out.